what makes Newark so hard to catalyze development in? Why can't we get this lease signed? As one example. But let me talk a little bit about one of the sort of subtleties of Newark that I think does make it incredibly difficult to catalyze development, which is that, like many sort of asset-rich places, assets can be a blessing and a curse. Newark's curse of its location, if you will, in my mind, is the value of parking. Parking is so incredibly valuable in Newark that it's pretty easy to make the case that almost every building in the city would be worth more torn down than it is standing. That the highest and best use from an economic perspective, especially in a low-yield environment, tends to be parking. And what that means is that most of the prime development sites that you see in downtown, that you see as parking lots, that in most places are associated with poverty, lack of investment, are actually a symbol of the asset curse of Newark. And so when all those parking lots lead to a sort of a second challenge for Newark, which is that the urban planning and the urban environment is not up to par with comparable cities, whether it's New York City, whether it's Jersey City, Hoboken, Brooklyn, whatever urban proxies you're looking at. One of the distinct features you notice in Newark is that there's such a discontinuity of the street life, right? There's giant parking lots all over the place. Buildings are isolated from one another. They've been developed, I think, unduly so, but developed with a tremendous fear of crime and therefore isolated from the street. And so the value of parking sort of coupled with sort of bad urban planning, see the Gateway complex where it's off the street, has led, I think, to making Newark from just a physical and a development perspective much harder than it needs to be. A third challenge that I'm sure many of you are familiar with is that New Jersey is a very high labor cost environment for construction, particularly when you start to talk about multifamily, large scale, steel and concrete type of construction. There are major wage premiums associated with that, and so Newark has to basically compete in price in the New York City labor market. That actually compounds the challenges because the prices that you see for most assets can only be justified by high density development. And so it's not as if you can do what's happening in Harrison, which is to build 4-story wood block and plank construction. That's not really an option for Newark given where land prices are and just the difficulty of assembling financing for sites. That leads to, I think, a fourth challenge, which is that there's no real easy opportunities for small-scale projects. And that makes it hard because large projects are fundamentally more complicated. They rely on these collaborative partnerships, deep amounts of investment. Things can fall apart at a moment's notice, and you've seen that probably in Newark, that you've probably seen 10 years ago, 5 years ago, similarly kind of boosterism speeches that didn't come to fruition because what happens when things get large and complicated is that they're more vulnerable to one element falling apart. So I think those four challenges, at least in my mind, speak to part of what's made Newark so hard to catalyze the cycle of redevelopment. As to why it's happening now, I think you can look for sort of four antidotes to each of those points. We have unprecedented leadership at the major institutions in Newark, whether that be at Rutgers with Chancellor Cantor, whether that be at the city. The state leadership at the EDA has been tremendous in helping Newark. We have very strong development firms. I mean, three of them are represented here today that I think have this unique combination of having cut their teeth in other markets, having experience, having capital, but not being so big that they're not willing to put up with the brain damage of Newark, right? So Newark is, and John will tell you this in more detail, and Wasseem will tell you this, it's not worth the brain damage, but it requires people, I think, who can get past that. And so I think you've got the right sort of caliber of development colleagues who both have experience, but still have the willingness to sort of put in insane days for what are relatively small projects. And then that's another crucial bit of leadership that we've had. So I think you have unprecedented leadership. The second thing that's changed is I think you also have on the financial and investment side. So this is what I do for Prudential and colleagues of mine at Goldman Sachs, Citibank, Deutsche Bank. For the first time in a long time, it's not just Prudential investing in Newark. You have major financial institutions who've made commitments, who've made successful investments, seen those investments and are willing to sort of take long views on investment projects. The Hain project is one example, is I think a $175 million project. Wasseem, the 65, One Theater Square, $100 million. These are large projects. They don't get done unless lenders are really willing to take a chance and take a bet on Newark. And so that's happening, I think, for the first time, and it's diverse. So you're not dependent on a single entity to make these projects happen. I can't emphasize enough, I think the state of New Jersey and the EDA and the strong pro-urban growth policies have been a tremendous help. Having worked in other places, New Jersey is not easy, but it is a generally positive climate to do development in. And I think we've seen that from the major public institutions that are willing to deliver a relatively reliable process. Certainly, I think a thoughtful and a strong process and a sensible one as well, which is also very crucial for these complicated projects. And then I think ultimately, as the first speaker said, you can't say enough about just how strong the macro trend is that's creating wind at the back of Newark. Prices in New York City are at unimaginably high levels. If you look at Hoboken and Jersey City, you're seeing consistent 15% year-over-year growth, new projects coming out of the ground, pro-forming close to $48 a square foot for residential housing. Newark works at a market level, probably at about $36 a square foot. You can probably make it work at $30 a square foot for residential rental when the right things come together. In terms of, I think, what sort of the big opportunities are, just to conclude, I think there's two key opportunities. One is around residential. Newark has so many incredible assets, the Whole Foods, the arts and culture, the universities, the transit, but a shockingly low downtown population. I don't want to give numbers out here because that's not properly vetted in an academic fashion, but our own internal sort of research suggests there's only 4,200 residents in downtown Newark. That's compared to, I think, 60,000 people who work there. That may not give enough credit to the students, but it's about the right order of magnitude for a downtown population. To put that in context, that's the downtown population of Lincoln, Nebraska. And so I think if you look at where the opportunity is in Newark, if anything, we've actually overbuilt the hard stuff, the Whole Foods, the parks, the universities, the assets. We haven't actually filled in the housing. I think there is tremendous opportunity for housing at all income levels and of all sort of asset quality in the downtown. The second opportunity, which is one that we don't talk about as much on these kind of panels, but I think is equally crucial for the future of Newark, is around what we would consider next generation manufacturing. Newark has a tremendous industrial legacy and a unique sort of position, I would say, in the entire northeastern seaboard for still having viable industrial locations. It has land that's zoned as industrial, that has access to highways, ports, airports. But what's shocking is that of all the industrial space in Newark, according to our research, less than 1% is what we would think of as Class A industrial, which is the kind of value-add industrial jobs that actually create quality jobs for residents and quality jobs for the state of New Jersey. We recently completed a project in the Ironbound that took a dilapidated old warehouse and turned it into the largest indoor vertical farm. That facility will employ 100 people at jobs beginning at $15 an hour and above. That, I think, is just, it embodies, I think, the potential, though, for taking some of those dilapidated industrial assets, leveraging a trend that many commentators have commented on, which is the onshoring of high-tech manufacturing facilities. And I think it's a huge hidden opportunity within Newark, and one for which the city is uniquely competitively positioned relative to the northeastern seaboard. So I'll leave it for the other speakers after that.